If you're tired of being almost remembered instead of impossible to forget, then what I'm about to share with you today will completely change how women experience you. Getting attention is easy in today's world because attention is based on visibility, not value. A loud voice, a flashy lifestyle, a few confident photos, a quick compliment, any of these can pull someone's eyes toward you for a moment. Attention is reactive. It is fast, shallow, and fleeting. It responds to stimulation, novelty, and surface level attraction. That is why so many people experience quick interest that disappears just as quickly. You can receive attention just by showing up consistently, posting often, speaking confidently, or playing a role that looks desirable. But none of that guarantees that you will stay in someone's thoughts when the noise of the world returns. Attention only lives in the moment. It disappears the second something louder, brighter, or more exciting replaces it. This is why someone can enjoy a conversation with you, smile with you, even flirt with you, and still forget about you by the end of the day. Attention doesn't require emotional investment. It doesn't require depth. It doesn't require vulnerability. It simply reacts to what is placed in front of it. Holding space in her mind is completely different because that requires emotional imprinting, not performance. For someone to think about you hours later, there must be an internal echo, something unresolved, something felt, something experienced on a deeper psychological or emotional level. This happens when a person doesn't just register you with their eyes, but with their nervous system. When you make someone feel seen in a way they rarely experience, when you touch an emotion they didn't expect to feel, when you activate curiosity, safety, excitement, reflection, or self-awareness inside them, the mind doesn't simply move on, it loops back. It revisits the interaction. It replays the tone of your voice, the moment of silence that felt meaningful, the way you responded when they made themselves emotionally visible. Holding space in her mind means becoming part of her internal world, not just her external environment. It means that even when you are absent physically, you are present psychologically. And that level of presence cannot be rushed, forced, or demanded. It emerges only when the interaction has substance. The reason holding space is rare is because most people are trying to extract something from the interaction instead of leaving something behind. They try to impress, to win approval, to secure attraction, to prove worth, to avoid rejection, to control the outcome. All of that creates pressure, and pressure shuts down emotional expansion. When someone feels that you are trying to get something from them, they stay guarded. Guarded people don't daydream. They don't emotionally revisit. They move on. Holding space requires you to be grounded enough that you are not chasing validation. It requires the ability to be fully present without being needy, warm without being dependent, engaging without trying to own the reaction. It requires patience with silence, comfort with uncertainty, and the emotional discipline to let connection unfold rather than forcing it into a result. This is why attention is everywhere, but true psychological presence is rare. Anyone can be noticed. Very few people are remembered without reminding, repeating, or reaching out again. The psychological trigger that makes someone emotionally curious about you is not mystery in the dramatic sense, and it is not manipulation disguised as strategy. It is the moment when their mind senses unfinished emotional meaning. Emotional curiosity is born when something inside them feels slightly activated but not fully resolved, when their nervous system registers a shift but cannot immediately label it. This happens when you don't rush to define the interaction, when you leave emotional space instead of filling every silence with performance. A person becomes curious when they feel understood but not fully uncovered, when they feel seen but not fully decoded. The human brain is wired to seek closure, and when you gently open an emotional loop without closing it too quickly, the mind naturally returns to it. This is why subtle depth is far more powerful than excessive expression. When your presence creates emotional contrast, calm where they expect chaos, depth where they expect surface, steadiness where they expect unpredictability, their internal world pauses and takes notice. Curiosity begins the moment their expectations collapse and something unfamiliar but safe takes its place. The mind doesn't chase what feels predictable, but it leans toward what feels quietly intriguing, especially when that intrigue is tied to emotion rather than entertainment. Emotional curiosity grows strongest when you activate self-reflection inside the other person without forcing it. When someone begins thinking about themselves differently because of a conversation with you, the curiosity deepens without effort. This happens when your words don't just respond to what they say, but to what they feel beneath what they say. When you notice emotional patterns instead of surface behavior, when you mirror insight instead of flattery, when you respond with clarity instead of reaction. The moment a person feels emotionally recognized at a level they are not used to, their mind begins circling back to you because you are now associated with inner awareness. They don't just wonder what you think of them, they begin wondering what they think of themselves around you. That is where emotional curiosity becomes attachment in motion. It is no longer about attraction alone, it becomes about internal stimulation, about how their inner world feels more active, more awake, more questioned in your presence. This is also why emotional curiosity fades when someone tries too hard to impress. Performance steals mystery. Over-explaining kills exploration. Predictability shuts down imagination. The emotional mind thrives on subtle uncertainty balanced with safety. When you offer clarity without oversharing, interest without intensity, warmth without pressure, you allow the other person's imagination to participate. And whatever the mind participates in, it becomes invested in. Emotional curiosity is not pulled by force. It is invited by restraint, by depth that is hinted at rather than displayed, by confidence that does not demand recognition, by presence that feels intentional rather than reactive, by silence that feels grounded rather than empty, by attention that feels selective rather than scattered, by interest that feels aware rather than hungry, by connection that feels unforced rather than rushed, by energy that feels steady rather than urgent, by a sense that there is more beneath the surface and the surface itself already feels meaningful. Emotional safety beats flashy attraction every time because attraction that is built only on excitement is unstable, while attraction built on safety becomes grounding, and the nervous system will always choose what feels regulating over what feels overwhelming in the long run. Flashy attraction creates adrenaline, suspense, intensity, and emotional spikes. And while that can feel intoxicating in the beginning, it is also exhausting because the body cannot stay in a heightened state forever. What begins as excitement often turns into anxiety when there is no emotional consistency underneath it. Emotional safety, on the other hand, activates a completely different system inside the body. It allows someone to relax instead of brace, to soften instead of perform, to exhale instead of stay alert. When a person feels emotionally safe with you, they don't feel the need to filter themselves constantly to protect every vulnerability or to prove their worth through perfection. They can arrive as they are. And when someone associates you with emotional relief instead of emotional pressure, your presence becomes a place their mind naturally wants to return to. Flashy attraction shouts for attention, but emotional safety whispers to the subconscious. And the subconscious always has the final say in who we feel drawn to over time. Emotional safety also creates depth in connection because it allows truth to exist without fear of punishment. When someone feels safe emotionally, they can express doubt without being dismissed, sadness without being minimized, boundaries without being challenged, and needs without being judged. This kind of connection builds trust not through words, but through lived experience. It teaches the nervous system that closeness does not automatically lead to danger, abandonment, or emotional chaos. Flashy attraction often thrives on unpredictability, on hot and cold behavior, on tension without clarity, on chemistry without consistency. And while that can feel thrilling, it also keeps the emotional system in constant scan mode, waiting for the next shift. Over time, that creates emotional fatigue. Emotional safety does the opposite. It stabilizes. It slows the internal world down enough for genuine attachment to grow. It allows someone to imagine a future without feeling overwhelmed by it. It allows connection to deepen without the constant fear of emotional withdrawal. And this is why safety becomes addictive at a level that excitement alone never can. People may chase the spark at first, but they stay where they feel safe to be human. What makes emotional safety even more powerful than flashy attraction is that it does not compete with excitement, it transforms it. When safety and attraction coexist, the connection becomes both energizing and grounding, both stimulating and stabilizing. But when attraction exists without safety, it eventually collapses under its own intensity. Emotional safety allows desire to soften into continuity. It allows passion to exist without volatility. It allows curiosity to become consistency. A person who feels emotionally safe with you begins to associate you with peace, clarity, steadiness, and internal calm. And those associations quietly shape attachment in ways that are far stronger than dramatic highs. Flashy attraction may dominate the beginning of a story, but emotional safety determines who remains when the novelty fades, who is chosen when the nervous system is tired of performing, who is trusted when vulnerability replaces excitement, who becomes a reference point for emotional regulation rather than emotional chaos, who becomes linked to stability rather than unpredictability, who becomes associated with rest rather than emotional labor, who becomes a place of return rather than a moment of stimulation. Controlled mystery is more powerful than constant availability because the human mind does not bond deeply with what is always accessible without effort. When someone knows they can reach you at any moment, when every message is instantly answered, when every emotional need is immediately met, the nervous system stops registering significance. Availability without limit slowly turns into emotional background noise. Not because you become unimportant, but because your presence is no longer associated with anticipation, depth, or emotional pacing. Desire needs space to breathe. Curiosity needs room to expand. When everything is immediately available, the imagination has nothing to do, and the imagination is the engine of emotional attachment. Controlled mystery is not about playing games or creating artificial distance. It is about maintaining a sense of self that does not collapse into constant access. It is the quiet signal that your life is full, that your energy is intentional, that your presence is chosen rather than default. When availability is constant, value is assumed. When access feels earned, value is felt. Controlled mystery works because uncertainty mixed with emotional safety activates the brain's attention system without triggering anxiety. The mind stays interested not because it is desperate for reassurance, but because it is gently stimulated by what it cannot yet fully predict. This is where presence becomes powerful. You are there but not consuming. You are warm but not dependent. You are responsive but not instantly absorbent. This balance tells the subconscious that you are grounded in yourself, not orbiting around someone else's approval. And grounded people naturally naturally become reference points for stability and intrigue at the same time. Constant availability often comes from fear of loss, fear of being replaced, fear of not being enough, fear of disconnection. And fear always leaks through behavior. It turns presence into pressure. It turns interest into intensity. It turns connection into monitoring. Controlled mystery, on the other hand, comes from emotional regulation. It comes from knowing you do not have to be everywhere to be meaningful. It comes from being comfortable with pauses, with silence, with unanswered space, with delayed gratification. What makes controlled mystery especially powerful is that it allows the other person's emotional world to participate in the connection instead of just receiving it. When you are not always there to fill every gap, their mind steps in. It wonders, it replays, it reflects, it constructs meaning. And meaning is what transforms attention into attachment. The brain becomes invested in resolving the emotional space you leave open. This is not manipulation. This is psychology. The mind always moves toward what feels incomplete but promising. Constant availability completes everything too quickly. There is no emotional arc, no anticipation, no internal movement. Everything is flattened into immediate response. Controlled mystery preserves emotional dimension. It makes interactions feel alive instead of transactional. It allows connection to unfold instead of being consumed all at once. It keeps emotional energy circulating instead of stagnating. Controlled mystery also protects your self-respect in ways constant availability cannot. When you do not abandon your rhythm, your priorities, your inner order for immediate responsiveness, you communicate value without saying a word. You show that you are not driven by urgency to be chosen, but by choice to be present. This creates a different emotional posture. You are not asking to be held in someone's mind. You are naturally occupying it because your presence has boundaries, pacing, and intentionality. Constant availability often feels generous at first, but over time it can feel invasive, needy, or emotionally excessive. Controlled mystery feels spacious. It gives the other person room to desire, room to miss, room to process, room to grow into the connection instead of being overwhelmed by it. It allows attraction to mature rather than burn out. It gives emotional experiences layers instead of flooding them all at once. It creates rhythm instead of saturation. It builds gravity instead of pressure. It allows you to be felt without being consumed. The mistake most men make that silently kills fascination is that they try to secure the connection too early, and in doing so, they remove the very uncertainty that keeps emotional interest alive. The moment a man starts behaving as if the bond is guaranteed, the dynamic shifts from discovery to certainty, and certainty without emotional depth quickly becomes dull. This shows up in constant checking, over-communication, premature emotional investment, emotional explanations that arrive before curiosity has fully developed, and reassurance seeking disguised as care. What once felt organic starts to feel managed. What once felt intriguing starts to feel monitored. Fascination requires space to grow, but insecurity tries to close that space immediately. Instead of allowing attraction to unfold naturally, many men rush to define it, label it, confirm it, and stabilize it before it has had time to breathe. And the nervous system does not fall into fascination through force. It falls into fascination through gradual emotional permission. Another silent killer of fascination is emotional overexposure without grounding. Sharing vulnerability is powerful when it is anchored in self-regulation, but when vulnerability comes from emotional hunger, it creates imbalance. Many men open emotionally not because they are ready to be seen, but because they are seeking to be held. That energy is felt instantly, even if it is never spoken directly. Fascination thrives when a person feels emotionally emotionally secure within themselves, not when they outsource their emotional stability to another. The more a man needs a reaction, a response, a reassurance, or an emotional return, the more the other person feels the pressure of responsibility, and pressure suffocates intrigue. Fascination does not grow in environments where the emotional outcome feels like a duty. It grows where interest feels invited, not demanded. A third mistake that quietly erodes fascination is predictability born from over-adaptation. When a man begins reshaping his personality, opinions, schedule, boundaries, and emotional posture purely to fit what he thinks will keep her interested, he slowly disappears inside the connection. What initially felt like chemistry starts to feel like compliance. The polarity that once created tension dissolves into sameness. Attraction needs difference. It needs friction of identity. It needs to feel that two independent energies are choosing to meet, not that one is dissolving into the other for survival. Over-adaptation communicates fear of loss instead of confidence in self. And fear never inspires fascination. Fear only inspires control, comfort, or avoidance. Fascination also dies when consistency turns into emotional monotony. Showing up steadily is important, but showing up without emotional variation, without growth, without depth, without curiosity, turns presence into routine. When interactions begin to feel formulaic, when responses become predictable, when emotional expression loses its edge of authenticity and turns into habit, the emotional system stops registering novelty. The brain thrives on meaningful variation, not chaos, but aliveness, not drama, but emotional texture. When everything feels the same, the mind stops leaning forward. It stops wondering. It stops anticipating. And anticipation is the emotional heartbeat of fascination. The most damaging part of this mistake is that it is rarely loud. There is no argument, no betrayal, no dramatic ending. Fascination simply fades quietly as emotional tension dissolves under the weight of over-availability, over-explaining, over-giving, over-adapting, over-exposing, and over-investing before emotional reciprocity has fully matured. And by the time confusion sets in about why the energy has shifted, the dynamic has already reshaped itself into familiarity without desire, closeness without curiosity, connection without charge. Leaving emotional fingerprints instead of empty impressions begins with understanding that most interactions disappear because they never touch anything meaningful inside the other person. An empty impression is created when conversation stays on the surface, when energy is performative, when words are exchanged without emotional resonance. People meet hundreds of personalities, hear thousands of stories, and receive endless communication every day, but very few experiences actually register inside their emotional memory. Emotional fingerprints are created when you affect someone's internal state rather than just their external mood. It is not about being impressive, entertaining, or clever. It is about creating a subtle emotional shift that lingers after you are gone. When someone walks away from you feeling calmer than before, more understood than usual, more confident than expected, more reflective than they intended to be, you have touched their emotional system, not just their attention. The nervous system remembers regulation, validation, and depth far more than it remembers excitement alone. Emotional fingerprints are formed through presence that is attuned rather than reactive. When you are fully present with someone without trying to direct the outcome, their system relaxes. When you listen without waiting for your turn to speak. When you respond to what they feel instead of what they say. When you allow silence without rushing to fill it. When you make space for their unfiltered truth without correcting it, their emotional world begins to open in ways they did not anticipate. That openness becomes associated with you. You become the environment in which they feel safe enough to be real. And the human mind bonds deeply with the places where it feels permission rather than pressure. Empty impressions are formed when the interaction revolves around performance, impression management, validation seeking, or outcome chasing. Emotional fingerprints are formed when the interaction revolves around emotional authenticity without agenda. Another way emotional fingerprints are created is through emotional contrast. When you respond differently than expected in moments that usually trigger defense, humor, or dismissal, you stand out at the level of the nervous system. When you remain calm where chaos is expected, when you offer steadiness where reactivity is expected, when you offer insight where flattery is expected, when you offer clarity where confusion is expected, the emotional body pauses. That pause becomes memory. Memory becomes meaning. Meaning becomes internal attachment. This is why emotional maturity is quietly magnetic. It does not announce itself. It simply alters the emotional atmosphere in a way that feels rare. Emotional fingerprints also come from how you handle vulnerability, not just from creating it. When someone risks emotional exposure with you and feels safer afterward, instead of ashamed, lighter instead of burdened, respected instead of analyzed, your presence becomes a reference point for emotional safety. Many people extract vulnerability for intimacy without realizing the emotional responsibility that comes with receiving it. Emotional fingerprints are left by those who know how to hold what is shared without exploiting it, fixing it prematurely, minimizing it, or turning it into a moment of superiority. The nervous system tracks this at a level deeper than logic. It remembers who made it feel handled with care. Empty impressions fade because they never stretch someone inward. Emotional fingerprints last because they deepen someone's relationship with themselves through you. They remember you not because of what you said, but because of who they became around you in that moment. They remember the clarity they felt afterward, the calm in their chest, the softening of their defenses, the feeling of being emotionally met without being emotionally consumed, the quiet shift of returning to their inner world with more awareness than before, the experience of being understood without being defined, supported without being weakened, seen without being exposed, touched emotionally without being taken from, held without being confined, moved without being pushed, awakened without being overwhelmed, regulated without being restrained.